The cockpit was alive, with the gentle glow of displays, as Captain Liam Hayes adjusted the ship's course, allowing the vast, tranquil expanse of space to unfold before him. The ether floated in the deep quiet, miles of emptiness humming just beyond the reinforced hull. He breathed it all in, savoring the thrill that still crept up his spine, no matter how many years he had spent out here. "Alana, scan for anomalies," he said, his fingers gliding over the controls. The onboard AI flickered to life, a soft feminine voice filling the silence. "Scanning," Captain Alana replied. "All standard data points appear stable. No anomalies within a 1 parsec radius." "Thanks, Alana. Keep an eye out. Something feels off." Liam's instincts had rarely led him astray, and they were tingling now. He sensed an unsettling presence, as if the universe itself held its breath, something lying in wait just beyond his sensor's reach. It was a familiar feeling that, in his experience, usually hinted at something remarkable or perilous. He settled into his chair, gripping the edges tightly. His eyes narrowed on the dim glow of distant stars as he leaned forward. A sudden flash of light streaked across his vision, a white-hot line moving in an unnatural, almost deliberate arc. "Alana, what was that?" Liam's voice cut through the silence, sharper than he intended. "It appears to be an energy signature, Captain," she replied smoothly, "consistent with high-level gravitational interference. Shall I alter course to investigate?" "Yes. And keep shields on standby. I want full defensive systems primed." The ether tilted slightly, thrusters firing as it angled toward the mysterious streak. Liam's pulse quickened, his heart pounding with anticipation. He had encountered his fair share of strange phenomena in the depths of space, but something about this felt different, a gravitational pull unlike anything he had felt before, whispering promises of an encounter beyond his understanding. As the ship drew closer, the energy signature grew brighter, revealing a planet that loomed suddenly large on the main viewport. A dark, uncharted world veiled in thick, violet-hued clouds that churned like storm-laden oceans, and at the center of it all, an object small, crystalline, almost painfully bright, hung suspended in the air. "Alana, what is that?" he asked, his voice hushed. "I cannot identify it, Captain. The object appears to be radiating a containment field of unknown origin. No readings match known materials or energy sources." He could hardly believe what he was witnessing. Some force seemed to call to him, urging him to reach out, to dive deeper. Liam exhaled slowly, his fingers brushing across the main console. "Well," he muttered to himself, "I guess there's only one way to find out." Suddenly, the entire ship shuddered, the consoles flashing crimson as alarms blared. "Unstable energy detected! Brace for impact!" Alana's voice crackled with urgency. The ship jolted, its systems spiraling into disarray. The world spun and twisted until Liam felt as though he were being wrenched from time and space altogether. He gasped, clinging to his seat as his vision blurred, shapes and colors twisting before his eyes. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything went still. He opened his eyes to find himself face to face with her. She stood in the cockpit, tall and impossibly still, her gaze piercing like the cold fire of distant stars. Her skin was a shade of silver, so soft it was almost ethereal, shimmering like liquid metal under the dim lights. She wore no visible clothing. Instead, silken strands of dark fabric, or perhaps shadow itself, coiled around her form, almost alive in the way they shifted and undulated. Who are you?" Liam managed, his voice wavering. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes like dark pools, endless and inscrutable. "You may call me Amara," she said, her voice soft but echoing as if it had traveled a great distance. "And you, Captain Hayes, have intruded upon my domain." "Your domain?" Liam swallowed, his mind racing as he tried to grasp what was happening. "I'm a researcher exploring the galaxy, cataloging stars, planets, phenomena. I didn't know anyone lived here." "There is much you do not know," Amara replied, a faint smile curving her lips. "But your ignorance does not absolve you. I've watched you approach for some time. I allowed it." Her eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze becoming sharper. "Tell me, what do you seek out here in the vastness of space?" "Knowledge," he answered almost automatically, understanding that there was so much out there they didn't know, so much to discover. "And you?" He gestured to her and the strange world beyond his cockpit. "You're unlike anything I've ever encountered." She studied him intently, as if peeling back layers of his thoughts and intentions. "Many have passed through my domain, Captain," she said, her tone soft but tinged with distant sadness. "But few have ever truly seen me. Tell me, do you fear the unknown?" Liam hesitated. "I think everyone does to some extent, but fear hasn't stopped me before." Perhaps that is why you interest me," Amara murmured, a thoughtful glint in her gaze. You are unafraid of what others flee. You move toward the shadows, the mysteries that consume the souls of others." She took a step closer, and Liam's breath caught in his throat. Her presence was overwhelming, an aura around her that defied explanation, a sense of age and power that seeped into the air like an intoxicating perfume. He found himself leaning forward, almost against his will. "Listen, Amara," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I don't mean any harm. I didn't even know this place existed until a few moments ago. If you let me go, I promise I'll leave you in peace." For a long moment she was silent. Her gaze seemed to soften, her dark eyes filled with a profound sadness that weighed heavily in the air. "Leave?" she echoed softly, almost to herself. "Is that what you desire most, Captain Hayes?" The question was unsettling in its intensity. "I don't know," he admitted, caught off guard by her directness. "I mean, of course I want to return to my mission, but there's something about this place, about you, that I can't seem to look away from." A faint smile graced her lips, a ghostly expression that faded as quickly as it appeared. "That is because you are curious, drawn to what lies beyond the bounds of understanding. But be warned, Captain, some mysteries cannot be solved. Some answers lead only to deeper questions, questions that may consume you." Her words hung heavy in the air, filling the small space between them. For the first time in his life, Liam felt an unease that had nothing to do with physical danger. There was a gravity to her words, a promise of something both wondrous and terrifying. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Perhaps nothing. Or perhaps I want everything you have to give." A cold shiver ran through him at her words, but he found himself unable to break her gaze, as if she had wrapped an invisible thread around him, binding him to her. "You could release me," he ventured, his voice a strained murmur. "Release you?" Her smile returned, sad and distant. "There is no release from this place, Captain. There is only understanding." With that, the world around them faded, and Liam felt himself falling into an abyss deeper than anything he had ever known. He drifted in darkness, disoriented and weightless, reaching out instinctively, grasping at empty air. Then he felt solid ground beneath him once more. Blinking, he adjusted to the dim light around him. He was no longer in the cockpit of the ether. Instead, he found himself in a vast, dimly lit hall, its walls stretching into shadowed infinity. The floors glistened like polished obsidian, reflecting pinpoints of distant starlight. Strange symbols, ancient and unreadable, marked the walls, casting faint spectral glows. And there, in the center of it all, stood Amara, watching him with that same piercing gaze, her expression unreadable. "What is this place?" he managed, his voice barely more than a whisper, still dizzy from the sudden shift. "This is my domain," she replied, her voice a soft echo that seemed to come from all directions at once. "A sanctuary and a prison." Liam took a hesitant step forward, glancing around. "But why bring me here? What am I supposed to see?" "What you see is what you must understand, Captain Hayes." Her gaze softened, yet held a strange sadness, as though the weight of ages lay upon her slender shoulders. "This hall, these walls, they are all that remains of a time long past. They hold fragments of lives, stories, countless voices lost to the stars, and they are my companions." She extended a slender hand, and as she did, the walls began to glow, faint images swirling within their surface. "Live." Liam watched in silent awe as scenes materialized. Glimpses of ancient battles, cities bathed in alien light, a people who seemed both like and unlike any race he had ever seen. Who were they? he asked softly, drawn into the flickering memories like a moth to flame. They were once my kin, Amara answered, her voice distant and heavy with regret. My family, my friends, my world. She sighed, a quiet, almost fragile sound that reverberated through the empty space. I watched them rise, and I watched them fall, all of it so long ago. Liam swallowed, his mind racing as he tried to process the implications of her words. You're the last of them? A faint nod. The last. The only one who remembers. She looked away, as if unable to meet his gaze. The punishment of the ages, Captain Hayes, is not death. It is life. Endless, solitary life. He felt a pang of something unexpected. Sympathy, maybe even empathy, as he took in the lonely figure before him. How long have you been here? Longer than you could comprehend, she replied, almost to herself, her eyes darkened, fixed on a distant memory only she could see. They made me this way. They sealed me to this world, bound me in time as punishment for a discovery they feared. And so I have remained while the stars have shifted, while empires have risen and crumbled to dust. But why? He took a step closer, unable to mask his curiosity. What could be so dangerous that they would imprison you here? Her gaze snapped back to him, and for a moment, a spark of anger flared in her dark eyes. They feared what I had learned. They feared that if the knowledge I possessed spread, it would unravel everything they held sacred. She looked away, her voice softening once more. And in the end, I was left with nothing but eternity. He hesitated, absorbing her words. There was a part of him that wanted to resist, to push back against her story, to cling to the rationality he had always known. But another part, the part of him that had always chased mysteries, that had always longed to see the unknown, felt a strange, inexplicable pull toward her. So you're saying you've just been here alone for all this time? He asked, his tone softer now, almost hesitant. She nodded, a ghostly smile curving her lips. Until you came, she murmured, her voice almost a whisper. Liam felt a strange warmth rising in his chest, a feeling he could barely understand, let alone explain. He shook his head, trying to keep his thoughts clear. And you're keeping me here because... Because I need someone to bear witness, she replied, stepping closer, her gaze locked onto his. To remember me. To remember them. Her voice held a hint of desperation now, a vulnerability that made his heart ache. You cannot imagine the solitude, the silence that stretches across centuries. When I saw your ship, your presence. Her voice faltered, and she looked away as if ashamed of her own words. I couldn't let you leave, not yet. Amara. He hesitated, feeling a weight pressing down on him. Part of him wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her, but another part, a stronger part, fought against the feeling. You can't just keep me here. I have a life, a mission. Do you think I do not understand that? She interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp. She took another step forward, her gaze fierce. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted to be alone? To be cut off from everything I loved? No. I'm not saying that, he replied, taken aback by the intensity in her eyes. But holding me here, it's not right. It's cruel. She finished for him, her voice bitter. His shoe. Perhaps it is, but cruelty and necessity are often indistinguishable when one has endured as long as I have. They stood in silence, her words hanging heavy in the air between them. He could feel her pain, her sorrow radiating from her like a physical force. And despite his instincts, despite everything telling him to resist, he found himself softening. His resolve faltered. Maybe, he began slowly, his voice hesitant, unsure. Maybe there's a way for both of us to get what we want? Her gaze flicked to him, a faint glimmer of hope in her dark eyes. What do you mean? I mean, if you just let me go back to my ship, let me complete my mission. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Then I could still come back to see you. I could return. I'd be here by choice, not force. Amara's expression darkened. The glimmer of hope extinguished as quickly as it had appeared. You think I haven't tried that? You think you would be the first to promise me such a thing? She shook her head, her voice thick with sorrow. No, Captain Hayes. All who have left have forgotten me, forgotten everything they learned here. It is part of the curse. Once you leave, all memory of this place, of me, will be erased. Oh. Liam felt a cold shiver run down his spine. You're saying I wouldn't remember any of this? Not a single moment? She replied, her voice a quiet, resigned whisper. You would return to your life, continue on your path, oblivious to everything you've seen here. Dad. That is the nature of the curse that binds me. He stared at her, stunned, grappling with the weight of her words. All this, the sorrow, the beauty, the mystery, it would all vanish from his mind the moment he left. It was almost too much to comprehend, but he began searching for something, anything to hold on to. But there has to be a way. Some way for you to break free? Her gaze softened, a flicker of a sad smile touching her lips. I have searched for millennia, Captain. There is no escape, only companionship. She took a step closer, reaching out to him, her hand hovering just inches from his face. If you stay, if you choose to remain here, you would be free from the curse's effects. But the decision must be yours. Liam felt a strange tightness in his chest, a pull that resonated deep within him. The thought of staying with her, of sharing her world, of becoming a part of her endless existence. It was both terrifying and oddly compelling. He swallowed, his mind racing, the weight of the choice pressing down on him like a crushing force. Amara, he murmured, his voice barely audible. I don't know what to say. You don't have to decide now, she whispered, her hand finally reaching him, brushing against his cheek with a feather-light touch. I will not force you. But know this, Captain Hayes. Her gaze deepened, filling with a strange intensity. In all the ages I have endured, I have never met another like you. If you choose to leave, I will lose something I may never find again. The air between them grew heavy, charged with a tension that pulsed with a life of its own. He stared into her eyes, feeling himself drawn into the dark, endless depths, caught between the pull of his own freedom and the strange, inexplicable bond that had formed between them. He had come here searching for knowledge, for adventure, but now faced with the weight of her words, with the loneliness that lingered in her gaze, he realized he had stumbled into something far deeper, far more complex than he had ever anticipated. Liam stood at the edge of the vast, glimmering hall, Amara's quiet words still echoing in his mind. The silence stretched around them, heavy and consuming, as he grappled with the weight of the choice before him. If I stay, he began, breaking the silence, his voice barely more than a whisper. If I choose to stay here, Amara, what happens then? Amara's dark, enigmatic eyes met his, holding him captive with their depth. Then you would become part of this place, she said softly, her voice reverberating through the shadows. You would share my world, my memories, and in time, my solitude. Her words hung heavy in the air like a binding promise. He searched her face, feeling her loneliness as if it were his own. In that moment, he knew he was standing on the brink of something that would change him forever. I don't know if I can give up everything, he admitted, his voice wavering. My life, my memories, my freedom. It's too much to ask. A flicker of sadness crossed her face, and she nodded as if she'd known his answer all along. Then take your leave, Captain Hayes. Go back to your stars, your worlds, your life. She paused, her expression softening, though her eyes held a resigned sorrow. But know this, if you leave, all that we have shared will fade from your mind of him. The memory of me, of this place, of all you have seen here, it will vanish like a dream. A wave of uncertainty washed over him. He felt torn, as if he were being pulled in two directions at once. On one side, the allure of returning to his mission, to his life of exploration and discovery. On the other, the connection he had felt with Amara. A connection that felt both frightening and precious. He took a deep breath. Amara, isn't there any other way? Some way that we could both be free? Her gaze dropped, and for the first time, he saw something akin to vulnerability flicker in her eyes. I once thought there was, she murmured, almost too softly to hear. Long ago, I believed that if I could find one who understood, who saw me as I am,
then perhaps I could be freed. But no one who has entered this place has stayed. They have all left, and they have all forgotten. He stepped closer, reaching out to her almost instinctively. Amara, maybe I can stay a little longer, just to try and find a way to break the curse? She shook her head, her expression filled with a sadness that seemed to stretch across centuries.
Even if you stayed, Captain, the curse that binds me is not so easily broken. It was crafted by those who wielded powers beyond your imagining. I cannot ask you to sacrifice your life, your dreams, for a burden that is not yours to bear. Liam hesitated, feeling a swell of frustration and helplessness. He wanted to help her, to save her from this fate, but every solution seemed to slip through his fingers like sand.
Then if there truly is no way, if leaving means forgetting. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Let me remember this moment, even if it's only in this moment. Amara looked at him, her gaze filled with a strange mixture of gratitude and sorrow. A fleeting wish, Captain Hayes, she said, her voice almost a whisper. But perhaps it is enough. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, she reached out, placing her hand against his chest. A sudden warmth surged through him, filling him with an energy that felt both foreign and familiar, as if her essence were pouring into him. His vision blurred, and for a moment he glimpsed fragments of her life, her people, her world, her endless solitude. And then, as quickly as it began, the visions faded, and he was left with the overwhelming silence of her presence. I've given you all I can, she whispered, stepping back, her hand lingering against his chest for just a moment longer. A memory, a fragment of my existence. But you must choose, Liam. If you leave, you will forget. But if you stay...
He swallowed, feeling the gravity of her words settle within him. He knew that this was it, the final moment, the choice that would determine everything. I have to leave, he said at last, his voice thick with regret. I can't abandon my life, Amara. But he hesitated, the words catching in his throat. I won't forget you, even if the curse says I will. A faint, bittersweet smile curved her lips. Then go, Captain Hayes. Return to your stars. But remember, some part of me will remain with you, even if you cannot recall my name. He took one last lingering look at her, etching every detail into his memory. Then, with a heavy heart, he turned and stepped away, moving back through the darkened hall toward the light. The world around him began to blur, colors shifting and swirling, until he felt himself pulled upward, back toward the familiar confines of his ship. The sensation of weight returned, the cold solidity of the floor beneath his boots, and the hum of the ether's systems enveloped him once more. He looked around, disoriented, his mind foggy as though he had just woken from a deep sleep. Alana, he murmured, his voice hoarse. Alana, what's our status? Quote. Systems nominal, Captain, the Adi replied, her voice calm and even. We are holding position within standard space. He rubbed his temples, a faint nagging ache throbbing at the back of his mind. I feel like I was just... His voice trailed off, and he frowned, struggling to piece together the fragments of his memory. But try as he might, the details remained elusive, slipping further and further from his grasp. All he could recall was a sense of profound emptiness, a strange feeling of loss that he couldn't explain. Captain, Alana's voice broke through his thoughts, gentle and unobtrusive. Is everything all right? Yeah, I think so, he replied, though the words felt hollow. He glanced out at the stars, a vague sense of longing filling his chest. There was something he was missing, something important, but he couldn't for the life of him remember what it was. Taking a deep breath, he turned back to the controls, setting the ship on course toward the next sector of space. The vast emptiness stretched before him, silent and infinite, and yet he felt a strange sense of peace, as if a presence lingered somewhere in the quiet. Just as he was about to engage the thrusters, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the cockpit's glass. His hand went to his chest, where a faint silvery mark glimmered just beneath his shirt. A small, intricate symbol, almost like a piece of jewelry embedded in his skin. A chill ran down his spine as he stared at it, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. The symbol felt familiar, as though it were tied to something precious, something he had lost and yet still held within him. Alana, he began,
his voice barely more than a whisper. "Do you see this mark?" But the AI remained silent, as if unable to detect the symbol at all. Then, in a flash, he heard a voice. A soft, distant whisper that seemed to echo from the depths of his mind. "Remember me, Liam," it murmured, as faint as a breath on the wind. "Even if you cannot recall my face, remember that I was here." He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of her presence settle within him, lingering like a faint memory, half-formed and yet somehow eternal. He knew deep down that he would never truly be able to forget her, that somehow she would always be with him, a part of his soul that no curse could erase. And as the ether drifted through the silent expanse, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him, a quiet certainty that wherever he went, he would carry her memory hidden but unbreakable, an echo of a connection that spanned the ages. Liam set a course into the starry unknown, and as the ship surged forward, he knew that no matter where he traveled, a part of him would always look back, bound forever to the immortal woman who had changed his life in ways he would never fully understand.